Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and you are watching and listening to the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast, which is part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network. Max the Dog and I are coming to you from deep inside the Jam bunker today, from the heart of Northern Appalachia in Pittsburgh. Today on the program, Steven Tingle, and his book Graveyard Fields is out now. And we had a very lovely conversation. If you've listened to the program at all, you're going to be a little bit shocked by how he ended up becoming a novel writer, which is fantastic. And it's why I do this program, because writers are just a weird lot. So Steven lives down in Greenville, South Carolina. He's a journalist focused on luxury lifestyle and travel, and was the editor at large for Tempest, a publication for private jet owners. He wrote a script detailing the early history of South Carolina textile industry, and it's been produced and it's going to air in PBS this year. He grew up in the mountains of Crusoe, North Carolina, where he spent years mowing greens and washing golf carts before studying hotel and restaurant management and going on to manage his parents' golf course. So this will be probably the only literary podcast where you ever get a long discussion about golf courses. Before we get to all that, just a couple bits of business we got to cover. The Jam proper comes out every Wednesday, and these podcasts come out about Monday and Friday. And there's a couple things you can do to help us spread the word about them. First, tell your friends about us. That is the number one way that we get found out. And second, leave us a review wherever you listen to the audio podcast, in particular if you listen to Apple, because they allow you to leave a written and a star review. You can also head on over to our Facebook page and leave us a review there, or head to thewritersjam.com and leave us a testimonial through the contact page. While you're there, you can do things like check out this video podcast series, which you can also find on the Solid Listen Podcast Network YouTube channel. If you're looking for a book to read, we have both reviews and a bookshop link that you can click and buy the book right there from a local and independent bookstore. And if all that's too much, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. Everything will just show up right in your email box. Last thing you can do at the website, support everybody on the Solid Listen Network. Click on that Patreon button for just a couple bucks a month. You get commercial-free episodes and all kinds of bonus content from everybody on the network. So this was like a really fun conversation. Steven and I have a lot of similarities, and being a journalist, growing up in Appalachia and they're sort of the mountain regions and being outdoorsy. But it's always interesting to me when people fall into writing books, which happens more often than you would think. It's such a terrible endeavor, and yet people find themselves doing it. And so we were just sort of laughing because he kind of floats through the world. And you're going to hear a really fascinating story from a really funny guy. And it's a whole lot of like shoulder shrugging. We're like, well, and then I did this, and this is sort of where it led me, which I have to say is not that different from my life. And I'm guessing if you look back on what you do, most of you sort of had that like, man, I didn't really have a plan, and this is how it worked out. And I love those conversations because artists and people that write and people that create things fascinate me for so many reasons. But that sort of following what you want to do and sort of ending up in places you weren't expecting to go, I think makes some of the most interesting people on the planet. Plus, the kind of journalism he does is completely different than anything I've ever done, too. So how you end up in like travel and luxury, anything, clearly, I do not know how that happens. So it's a fun interview. He's a great guy. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. I appreciate you all stopping by. I appreciate you spending about a half hour of your day with Steven and I. I hope that you're doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourself. And I hope that you will sit back and enjoy my conversation with Steven Tingle. So when I grew up, my neighbor designed golf courses, and literally my whole family. Really? Yeah, he designed courses throughout Cincinnati and the greater sort of, greater Cincinnati region. And my aunt and like they all grew up working on a golf course. And I just realized like we got a thing in common.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what I did.
So, like, did your family do that? Is that what happened?
Yeah, my dad built and opened a golf course the year before I was born.
Like in the town?
Yeah, a little town called Crusoe, actually, where the book is set.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real place. And yeah, so I grew up there mowing greens, washing golf carts, doing all that stuff. That was
Is
my
that the
life.
only one he designed, or was he a golf course designer?
No, that was it. He
Really?
bought, yeah, he bought the land. That was just his dream. He had been in New York. He had been in the kind of fashion business, patterns. My grandfather was Butterick Patterns, so sewing patterns.
Yeah.
And my dad, and the company was bought out when my dad was in his early 40s, and he said, you know what, I'm going to leave Manhattan, I'm going to move to Western North Carolina and build a golf course.
Just cause.
Just because.
I'm,
That's what he did.
I'm assuming he was a golfer.
Not a good one. and knew nothing about building a course or managing it. And yeah, so it's amazing to think back at what he took on. But
Yeah,
he
that's insane.
it is. Yeah. Yeah. That's a hell of a midlife crisis, let me tell you.
Yeah. Now, did you guys have like ties to that town?
My mom is from there.
Okay. So at least there was one thing that
Yeah.
made sense about going back.
Yeah. So he leaves New York, gets divorced, buys all this land, meets this woman 13 years younger, gets married, builds a golf course, has me. There you go.
And then so you grew up. So you missed the whole Manhattan thing. Like you grew up in this small town
Yeah,
on this golf course.
I was born and raised right there. Yeah, in Crusoe.
So I know what my life was like around the golf courses. What was it like for you?
It was nice. I liked it. I liked being outdoors, and I didn't really give a shit about playing golf, but I liked being out there and having all that freedom of all that land, and having golf carts and
Yeah, there it is.
mowers and tractors and all that. Man, that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. What about 11 o'clock at night with the golf course is pretty good.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. If you grew up in a small town, you're like, oh yeah, like if you had access to that, like, oh, that's where trouble starts.
It was sweet. Yeah, that was good.
So when you sit down to like well, the other thing that we had in common, I know, is the journalism stuff, because you ended up, because golf is like, I was a baseball player, so like that is a leisurely activity that you do before, like for me, that's what it was. Like
Right,
you went out
right.
before a game. Like that is obviously a leisure sport.
Sure.
And then you become a writer and like are writing about the different kind of leisure stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So
All the
I
travel
left,
and everything.
right. I left the golf thing when I was, I guess 40, right at 40, and totally switched gears. Kind of like my dad, he switched gears around that when he was that age.
So you were with the golf course that long?
Yeah, yeah. I was
Wow.
there until I was my late 20s. I kind of took over as the general manager, and I was there until I was 40. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's
Went through
crazy.
Then had my midlife crisis. It was my turn.
Yeah.
Got divorced, moved towns, changed careers.
If we ever think if we ever think it's nature versus nurture, like here's a pretty good argument for nurture. So you leave that thing, and it's like, had you been writing up to that point?
No, not at all. Not at all. I thought I wanted to do something creative because I'd been in this management thing for so long. And I thought it would be cool to be a magazine writer because I was in love with magazines, and was stupid enough to think that you just email magazine editors and say, hey, I want to write for you. And they just bow down and give you assignments. And
We've been waiting for you to show up.
Barrel full of money. And yeah, and no, that didn't happen. So
That's
the only person that would talk to me was a guy who was the editor-in-chief of a trade magazine for golf course superintendents. So that's,
yeah.
I was trying to get away from golf, but that's the only person to give me a shot.
Yeah. It's I always tell young writers, it's the horror. Like you got to be careful what you write, because like as soon as you do that, then people are like, oh, you do that. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I can do other stuff. And they're like, no, you do that.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I didn't want to get stuck in that because I had been trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate, but that gave me some experience and some samples I could pass around. And then I got hooked up with some regional travel kind of magazines and like luxury lifestyle magazines. And once I got my foot in those doors, then I just left golf completely behind.
Yeah, but it is such an interesting phenomenon to just like at 40 decide, oh, I'm gonna just become a writer, and with no, you didn't have a background in that, right? Like there's nothing in the preceding 40 years that people were like, well, it's someday he's gonna be a writer.
No, not at all. Nothing. Nothing at all.
It's the best part about being a writer. So when do you decide like, hey, I want to do books?
So I had been doing magazine writing for probably 6 years, 7 years. And
like full time, that was your gig?
That was my gig, freelance writing.
Wow.
Mostly travel stuff. Yeah. And it was great because I got to travel around on someone else's dime.
Yeah.
You know, and I was scraping by.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but magazines don't pay a whole lot of money.
I've heard tale of such things. You heard that?
Yeah. I've said you can make hundreds of dollars a year as a freelance magazine writer.
I mean, it's the truth. Like, you know, I came up in the magazine industry and I was sort of there at the end of the heyday of, you know, I was at Condé Nast, you know, until about 2003. And like, that was when budgets started shrinking, both freelance and travel. And like, you know, you didn't send writers on a 2-week trip to report a story and pay $7,000.
Right.
My dog is apparently very upset about all of that.
I guess so. Very, very upset about
everybody in the household is sad. So you're doing this for about 6 years?
Yeah, I was doing it for about 6 years. I'd gotten connected with a couple of really kind of elite magazines. One was for was owned by a private jet company.
Oh,
so and it was like a vanity project for this guy who owned this jet company. So
they got money.
They got money. So they would send me places. And everything. And then that came to an end because vanity projects can't last forever, right?
Somebody's CPA is like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah, this is a bad idea. So I still had some other freelance clients. I was still writing, but I thought, okay, and this is a chance to do something different. And I just read whatever the latest Michael Conley book was at that time.
Uh-huh.
And I love all of his books. And I got jealous because I thought, man, this is really good. And you know, what I do is a lot of work. I gotta go interview people and record the interview and transcribe it and then fact check and then call them back. And then I gotta quote them, even though I think what I could say better what they're trying to say. Yeah. You know, I've got to quote him. It's like, this Conley guy just gets to make shit up. I want to make shit up. And that's how it started.
And you were like, I'm going to choose the job that pays less than being a magazine writer.
That's what I do, Brad. Yeah.
Like a lot more work. Like don't ever break down per hour what you've made.
Exactly right.
So how do you set about doing? So the book is Graveyard Field. So how do you set about? Because most people that I interview, when they decide to like, if they're, nobody knows how to be a writer. Nobody knows how to write a novel. And so when people start that, oftentimes they'll like take an MFA or they go start taking classes or they were like, I want to do this, but I actually don't know how to do it. How do you get started not knowing how to do that? Like how does that happen?
I just started at page 1. I had no outline, no idea. I just sat down and said, let's see what happens. And I always loved detective fiction. And I thought, man, it would be cool to put a detective in the little bumfuck town where I grew up. I think that would be cool. And I'm not a good detective, so he can't be a very good detective. He can't be very smart.
So we're not reading Sherlock Holmes.
You're not reading Sherlock Holmes. No, not at all. And that's what I did. And I think part of the reason I didn't give it a whole lot of thought or research at the beginning is because I know me, and I knew I'd never finish it. I thought I'll write a few thousand words and get this making stuff up thing out of my system and be done with it and move on to something else. But before I knew it, I had 40,000 words and thought, okay, it's got some weight to it. Maybe I should keep going and actually get this thing done.
So when you, like, were you just making the structure up as you went along, or like, did you have moments in there where you're like, I got to figure out like what happens in a detective novel?
Yeah, I was both. I was making it up as I was going along. And then at that point where I did have 40,000 words, I thought, I should have made an outline. Because I written myself into so many corners that I basically had to start over. I mean, so
Yeah.
I wrote this thing, 4 times probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
The joke I always make on the show is your first book is your 5th book. And sometimes you got 4 in a drawer, and sometimes you've rewritten the thing 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I did.
Yeah. Anytime people ask me how to write a book, I'm like, are you going to write it 5 times? Write it once, throw that out, start over, do that 4 more times.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And if you know that at the beginning, nobody would be a writer.
That's exactly right. Yeah. If you knew you had 5 to go.
Yeah.
You wouldn't get through it.
I feel like the writing process, I've said this before, is like the first draft is like, this is great. Then you read it and you're like, uh-oh, it's not. Then you don't want to talk about it for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you're flying through and thinking, this is great, this is great, this is great. Wait, this is shit. What am I?
The first read when the draft is done is like crushing every dream that you ever had.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So tell me about the book. Tell me about Graveyard, because it's set in your hometown, and I'm from a small town. We had one cop, Tony, who I don't need to talk about his last name, but like I always tell people, like, we were not getting in trouble for anything.
Yeah.
He was not going to catch us doing anything.
Yeah. So this is about a guy named Davis Reed, who's a kind of an ex-private detective, but not the kind of private detective that solves intricate mysteries. He's the guy you hire if you think your spouse is cheating on you and you need some photos of your spouse, at a seedy motel or something. And he's from Charleston, and some stuff happens in Charleston, South Carolina, and he ends up renting a little cabin in Crusoe to get away from Charleston and escape some bad business. And he just comes into contact with a host of bizarre local characters and stumbles into one mess after another, and is just lazy and apathetic, but good natured. And he's one of those flawed characters, but he is well aware of his flaws. He doesn't deny them, and he would like to change some of those, but just doesn't have the energy to do it.
Yeah, at a certain point, the cake's baked.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, might as well just live with it.
I mean, you and I are about the same age. It's like, well, this is what the cake's gonna look like. It may not be your favorite, but it ain't gonna be any other kind.
Yep, this is what I got.
When I was like, when I talk about my town had like 5,000. How many people how big was Caruso? Not Caruso.
Oh, Crusoe, just tiny. Not even I mean, it's got a volunteer fire department and a gas station. That's it.
It's bigger than the town. Mine was 5,000 people. Yours is smaller than that.
Yeah. It's tiny little community.
Yeah. And I tell people, like, the folks that end up in those towns are one of 2 kinds of people. Either their families have been there forever, or they're trying to get away from something.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's who. Yeah. And if you ask them, about their past, they may or may not tell you.
And you may or may not want to know.
Yeah, most. Yeah, I got lots of family that's like, some mysteries are better left unsolved.
That's right.
So the book comes out in August, right?
Yes, August 10th.
And this is your debut. This is your first one.
Yep, this is the first one.
How long from the time you put pen to paper, in a metaphorical way, to the time it came out?
I think I started in the spring of 2016.
So that's not bad. 5 years. I mean, I know now it seems like not a long time. At the beginning, you're like, when is this going to end?
Yeah. So I think that's when I started. That's when that kind of airline magazine folded. But then So yeah, 5 years. And then there was probably at least a year, maybe 18 months in that I didn't touch it at all, because I still had to pay the rent,
Yeah.
I still have to pay the rent.
Right.
So
Yeah. That never goes away.
it didn't change, but yeah.
So is this a guy you think you're going to keep writing about, or was this like a one-time thing, or do you not know yet?
No, I actually set it up to be a series because I like the detective series. Like I was saying, Michael Connelly and Harry Bosch and
Yeah.
John Sanford with Lucas Davenport, those kind of characters. So yeah, I thought it would be cool to keep this going. And I've actually finishing up the sequel right now. And I think they've already set it to come out in June of next year.
Wow.
June next year. Yeah.
Yeah. I call that the existential horror of success. Like, yay, I've got this done. Like, oh shit, I got to do this again immediately.
Yeah. I got to do this again with a deadline.
Yeah. There's none of this 5-year, let me meander through it. They're like, when's the next one? Like, holy shit, I don't know. When is the next one?
You tell me.
Yeah, that's the AT&T customer that you're trying to reach is out of service.
Right.
Well, that's great. It's such a, I know, it was such a weird tale. I've interviewed so many writers, and like the way you came about this is literally, I almost never say this because people's journeys are generally kind of the same. Like I've never talked to anybody that at 40 was like, yeah, fuck it, I think I'm going to try this other thing. And that other thing be writing.
Right.
So that's amazing. I'm really excited. And I love detective stories too. So I'm looking for, and I love small towns. So, and I love people who are flawed and kind of fucked up. So this sounds like right in my wheelhouse.
Just right up your alley, buddy.
Well, thank you for taking some time to chat with me today. Graveyard Fields is out in August, and I can't wait to pick it up.
Great. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Well, there you have it. That was Steven Tingle, whose book Graveyard Fields is out right now. He's great. It was such a fun conversation with him. And before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you liked what you heard and saw on the program today, do us those 2 favors we talked about at the top of the show. First, tell your friends about us. Best way to spread the word. Second, you can leave us a written review or starred review wherever you listen to podcasts. This is particularly important if you listen on Apple Podcasts. While you're at it, don't forget to check out all the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship Mother May I Sleep With podcast with host and our Solid Listen Podcast queen, Molly McAleer. Don't forget, we've got these video podcasts coming out on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel every Monday and Friday. We got a bunch of them coming out. You can also catch the audio wherever you listen to The Jam. Speaking of, The Jam is out every Wednesday, so make sure you are subscribed so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram at The Writers Jam. Until the next time, I will see you around the internet.